Welcome back, everybody. Can you believe it? Episode 10 already of our deep dive into the Lucasian professors of mathematics.
10 episodes.
I know it. And we've had some incredible figures so far.
We have Newton, Airy, the list goes on. Some serious giants in math and physics, that's for sure.
No doubt about it. But today, we're switching gears just a bit.
Oh, how so?
Well, today's subject, Thomas Turton, he held the Lucasian chair, but his story, it takes kind of an unexpected turn.
Unexpected, huh? It's putting it mildly, I think. I mean, we're used to focusing on, well, these huge figures in physics and pure mathematics, but Turton, yeah, brilliant guy, no question, but he made his biggest impact in a totally different area.
Okay, now you've got me really intrigued.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the ninth holder of the Lucasian chair, right? The one who came right after Airy.
That's him, exactly.
So fill us in. Where does Thomas Turton's story even begin?
Let's go all the way back to February 25, 1780. Picture Hatfield, West Riding of Yorkshire. That's where Thomas Turton was born. And from there, he started his academic journey at Queen's College, Cambridge. But then he ended up at St. Catherine's College.
St. Catherine's again. It feels like every single Lucasian professor we've talked about has some connection back to that college.
It's true, they have an incredible track record there. And Turton, well, he really lived up to that St. Catherine's reputation. In 1805, he achieved something truly remarkable, graduating as senior wrangler and, get this, earning the Smith's Prizeman in the same year.
Hold on, wait a minute. Those are like the top honors you can get, right? That's got to be like, I don't know, being valedictorian and winning a national science fair all at once.
That's exactly it. It almost never happens, especially in the same year. Seriously, it's incredibly rare, but it just goes to show you the kind of intellectual power Turton had and his dedication. He's obviously very committed to his studies.
Wow, no wonder he got elected as a fellow of St. Catherine's just a year later. But here's where things get a little interesting.
Interesting how?
Well, he held the Lucasian Professorship of Mathematics from 1822 to 1826. So that puts him right in that line of mathematicians that we've been exploring.
Right.
But then
What?
he became the Regius Professor of Divinity from 1827 to 1842. Quite a change, don't you think?
From equations to scripture, that's one heck of a leap.
You can say that again? What in the world could have prompted a shift like that? I mean, what made him go from math to religion?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But his published works, those might give us a few clues, because Turton, while he wasn't the kind of guy to stay confined to just mathematics, he was deeply involved in all the big theological and philosophical debates going on at the time, and he wrote a lot on some very, shall we say, controversial topics.
So even while he was the Lucasian professor, his interests were clearly starting to broaden. Do we have any idea what kind of mathematical work he was actually doing during those years?
Honestly, it's not something that's been documented very well. There's no record of any major discoveries or anything he published in mathematics during that time, as far as we know anyway.
So a bit of a mystery then.
Yeah, for now at least.
But it seems like his time as the Lucasian professor was sort of a springboard into these other areas that he ended up focusing on.
That's an interesting way to look at it. It really makes you wonder if his way of thinking mathematically had any impact on his approach to theology and all the other things he was involved in.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. But before we get ahead of ourselves there, let's go back to his career, to the timeline.
Okay, so where were we?
Well, after the Lucasian chair and then that Regius Professorship of Divinity, his path leads him right into the heart of the Church of England, right?
Absolutely. He became the Dean of Peterborough in 1830, served until 1842, and then, he stepped into a role that's basically synonymous with British history, Dean of Westminster Abbey.
No way. Westminster Abbey, that place is just dripping with history. Talk about a journey. From mathematical proofs to overseeing one of the most famous churches in the entire world.
I know, right? Oh, wait, there's more. The peak of his career, it came in 1845 when he was appointed Bishop of Ely. He held that position all the way until he died in 1864.
Wow, Bishop of Ely. It's pretty hard to grasp, that level of religious leadership. And to think it all started with this brilliant young mathematician at Cambridge.
Yeah, it just shows you, right? Intellectual curiosity, it can take you to some pretty amazing places. It reminds us that even the most prestigious positions, even something like the Lucasian chair, it doesn't have to mean just one path. Sometimes it's like a launching pad into totally different areas of knowledge and influence.
I'm really starting to see why you said Turton's story was unexpected. From the quiet world of academics to the grandeur of Westminster Abbey, and then leading an entire diocese, his life took some wild turns.
It definitely did. And along the way, he left behind a whole body of work that gives us a fascinating glimpse into his mind. This guy who straddled the worlds of mathematics, theology, and even social change.
All right, now I'm totally hooked.
Hmm.
So what were these publications you mentioned earlier? Did they give any clues about how his mathematical thinking might have shaped his views on these other things, like theology?
Well, there's one in particular that really stands out. It was published in 1834, and the title alone tells you he was wading into some deep waters. Thoughts on the admission of persons without regard to their religious opinions to certain degrees in the universities of England.
Whoa, that title is a mouthful. It
Ah.
sounds like Turton was diving headfirst into some pretty controversial stuff.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, no kidding. I mean, think about it. This was 19th century England,
Right.
a time of huge social and religious upheaval.
Absolutely.
The whole idea of letting people with different beliefs into universities, especially these universities with such strong religious ties, that was, well, it was incredibly divisive.
You're telling me it's a debate that still hasn't really gone away, even all these centuries later. Should higher education be open to everyone, regardless of their faith? Or should these institutions stick to a specific set of beliefs, a religious dogma? It sounds like Turton was tackling these really tough questions head on.
Oh, absolutely. He was right in the thick of it.
So what was his stance? Did he come down on one side or the other? I mean, did his writing say whether he was for or against admitting students with all these different religious views?
He was all for it.
Really?
He argued that intellectual ability and academic merit, those should be the main things that matter, not whether you adhere to a particular religious doctrine.
Wow. That was pretty progressive for the time, especially coming from someone, who'd risen through the ranks of the Church of England.
It was.
It makes you wonder, right, did his mathematical background, did that play a role in his thinking?
That's a question that's fascinated scholars for years. Was there a link between the logic of math and his approach to these big social and theological questions? Did his training in deductive reasoning influence his views on inclusivity and academic freedom?
It's almost like he was applying a mathematical lens, right, to these big societal problems. Like, instead of focusing on religious differences, he was emphasizing these shared intellectual pursuits, like a unifying force.
Exactly.
It really makes you think about how these seemingly totally different fields of study can actually inform each other.
It does. And for Turton, this wasn't just some theoretical thing. He was living this out in his own career, going from math to theology and then ending up in leadership roles in the church.
It's almost as if he was proving his point through his own life, right?
Sure.
But hold on, let's circle back to his writing for a sec. You mentioned he was a prolific writer. Didn't he write about a bunch of other things besides university admissions?
Oh, yeah. He wrote a ton. And as you might expect, given his position in the church, he dove deep into biblical studies, especially how to interpret Scripture. His work, The Text of the English Bible, that one really showcases his careful approach to understanding all the subtleties of translation and the historical context of the biblical texts.
I can imagine. That kind of scholarship, it must have required such a crazy level of detail and precision. It's like, those super meticulous proofs and theorems that mathematicians work through. Maybe that same dedication to accuracy and clarity, maybe that's what carried over into his theological work.
It's definitely possible. And speaking of tackling tough theological questions, there's another work of his that's really worth noting, The Roman Catholic Doctrine of the Eucharist Considered.
Okay, that one sounds like it could have stirred up some serious controversy. I mean, you've got the historical tension between the Church of England and the Catholic Church. What was Turton's take on the Eucharist?
Well, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds of theology here, but let's just say Turton's analysis was, thorough and kind of critical of the Catholic doctrine. He used the same rigorous logic and reasoning that he probably developed during his math days to really pick apart the arguments around the Eucharist.
So even when it came to faith and spirituality, he wasn't afraid to think critically, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was willing to question established doctrines and engage in these thoughtful debates, even on topics that could be pretty controversial.
Exactly. It seems like that willingness to question, to dig deeper and examine assumptions, that was just part of how he approached everything, whether it was mathematical equations or theological principles.
This is making me think about the Lucasian professorship in a totally new way. It wasn't just about producing groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics. It was about nurturing a specific kind of mind, a mind that could handle rigorous thinking, and then apply that rigor to any field of study.
That's a great point. And in Turton's case, that intellectual rigor, it was applied to some of the most pressing social and religious questions of his time.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
His journey From that Lucasian chair to leading the Church of England? Yeah, it seems unexpected at first. But maybe for someone like him, with his intellectual curiosity and that drive to seek truth, maybe it was a natural progression.
Maybe it was.
And, it makes you think, even if he didn't make any big breakthroughs in math during his time as Lucasian professor, maybe those years he spent grappling with complex mathematical problems, maybe that's what actually shaped his ability to tackle these tough theological and social issues with the same tenacity and precision later on.
It's an interesting thought. It reminds us that influence, it can be subtle, right? The impact of a job or an experience, it might not always be super obvious. Sometimes it's about how it shapes our thinking, how we approach problems, our whole worldview even.
Yep. So here we have it. This brilliant mathematician becomes this major figure in the Church of England, gets involved in these heated debates about university admissions, about religious doctrine, and all along we've got this question. Did his background in math, did that influence his thinking? It's a pretty captivating story, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. It highlights all these unexpected ways that intellectual journeys can unfold. We often think of different academic disciplines as separate things, right?
Yeah.
But Turton's life, it's a good reminder that the lines are often blurry. The skills and habits we develop in one area, they can totally enrich and inform our understanding of other areas.
It really does make you think differently about how knowledge all connects. We started this whole deep dive looking at these Lucasian professors of mathematics, expecting to talk about all these complex equations and scientific discoveries. But with Thomas Turton, it's different.
Totally different.
It's more about the power of a mind that's trained to think really rigorously,
Right.
and how that kind of mind can engage with all sorts of issues,
Yeah.
from the subtleties of biblical interpretation to the challenges of social reform. Pretty amazing.
It really is. It's like intellectual curiosity doesn't have to be limited to just one specific discipline.
I totally agree. Turton's story, I think it encourages us to embrace those unexpected connections, the ones between fields of study that seem totally different at first glance.
Exactly. And it makes me think about our listeners out there. We've got people from all walks of life tuning in, students, professionals, lifelong learners.
I know.
What would you say to someone who's maybe feeling inspired by Turton's story, but a little intimidated by everything he accomplished?
That's a good question. I think I'd say, don't let the sheer scope of his work discourage you. The real takeaway here is the power of transferable skills. It doesn't matter if you're passionate about math or history or literature or whatever else.
Right.
Being able to think critically, analyze information, build a logical argument.
Those are the skills that matter, and you can apply them across disciplines.
So it's not about being an expert in everything, right?
No, not at all.
It's more about having that way of thinking,
Yeah.
that mental framework that helps you approach new things with confidence and curiosity.
Exactly. Turton's life, it's a good reminder that learning isn't a straight line. It's about embracing the twists and turns, the unexpected detours that lead you to those fascinating discoveries, and a deeper understanding of the world.
And, hey, who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will be inspired by Turton's story to bridge their own passions, to combine their love of science with their interest in art or their knowledge of history with their tech skills.
The possibilities are endless.
Right. It's so exciting to think about.
It is, and it's a fitting way to honor Thomas Turton's legacy, wouldn't you say? A man who refused to be boxed in by disciplinary boundaries, and whose intellectual journey, well, it still inspires us today.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the life of the 9th Lucasian professor of mathematics. A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this fascinating exploration. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the lives of these incredible people who have shaped the world of science and beyond. Until then, keep those minds curious and let those passions burn bright.